The crystal glasses on the white linen tablecloths of the Portland Grand Hotel's banquet hall seemed to hum with a collective energy. It was a low, pleasant thrum of self-satisfaction, the sound of careers well spent and futures comfortably secured. I stood at the back of the room, a ghost at my own father's feast, clutching a small, elegantly wrapped box in my hands. The floral scent of the centerpieces was cloying, mixing with the expensive perfumes of the wives and the faint, masculine aroma of whiskey and cigars. My grip tightened on the box, the sharp corners of the velvet case inside digging into my palm. I forced my face to remain a mask of placid neutrality, a skill I had perfected over 39 years of being Harold Bennett's daughter. On the raised dais at the front of the room, my father, Harold Bennett himself, was in his element. At 65, he was still a formidable presence, his silver hair impeccably styled, his suit tailored to perfection. He stood at the podium, a veritable king surveying his court, his voice booming with the easy confidence of a man who had never known a day of self-doubt. He was retiring after a 40-year career as a structural engineer, a titan who had left his mark on the city's skyline. The crowd of colleagues, family, and friends hung on his every word. And of course, he was saying, his smile broadening as he gestured toward the head table, "I owe everything to my boys." A wave of applause, warm and genuine, washed over the room. I watched my brothers, Thomas and James, preen under the attention. Thomas, the eldest at 42, was the picture of success. He'd built a successful law practice from the ground up, marrying a woman from an equally prominent family. He leaned back in his chair, a smug, self-satisfied smile playing on his lips, basking in the praise as if it were a sunbeam designed exclusively for him. James, 38, sat beside him, looking equally pleased. He had taken over the family construction business, Bennett & Sons Construction, and expanded it into a regional powerhouse. Dad had initially been skeptical of James's intelligence, often remarking that he had more brawn than brains, but James had turned that skepticism into a fiery determination. He'd transformed our family's small company into something my father could now boast about, a tangible legacy. Both of my brothers had given Dad the grandchildren he bragged about constantly, the heirs who would carry on the Bennett name. They had married well, built successful careers in respectable, understandable fields, and produced perfect, photogenic families. They were the golden sons, the twin pillars of his pride. And then there was me. Invisible Naomi. My father's gaze swept the room, a benevolent king acknowledging his subjects. His eyes passed over me without a flicker of recognition before landing back on the crowd. "My sons made me proud," he boomed, his voice swelling with emotion. The words hit the banquet hall like a cold wind. My grip on the small box in my hands tightened until my knuckles were white. I forced my face to remain neutral, to not betray the storm raging inside me. "My daughter," he began, and for a heart-stopping second, a foolish, childish hope flickered within me. He paused, a theatrical beat that made the entire room lean in. He gave a small, dismissive chuckle. "Well, not everyone can be a winner." The words were followed by a wave of scattered, awkward laughter. It was the kind of laughter that dies quickly, replaced by the rustle of uncomfortable shifting in seats and the clinking of forks against plates. I felt dozens of eyes, a mix of pity and morbid curiosity, flick toward me at the back of the room. I stood frozen, the small box in my hand suddenly feeling as heavy as a tombstone. My entire life, I had been chasing his approval, a carrot he dangled just out of reach, and in one casual, public sentence, he had just confirmed what I had always suspected he believed: I was his biggest failure. "My name is Naomi Bennett. I'm 39 years old. And tonight was supposed to be about celebrating my father's 40-year career as a structural engineer. Instead, it became another reminder of why I'd spent most of my adult life trying to prove myself to a man who would never truly see me." My father's colleagues from North Peak Engineering filled the tables, their wives dressed in their finest, everyone eager to honor Harold Bennett's distinguished career. Everyone except me seemed genuinely happy to be there. He continued his speech, oblivious to the bomb he'd just dropped. He talked about legacy, about building things that last. He spoke of bridges and skyscrapers, of concrete and steel. The irony wasn't lost on me that the man who built bridges for a living had never learned to build one to his own daughter. That was it. The final straw. The casual cruelty of it, delivered with a smile in a room full of people, was the final crack in the dam I had built around my heart. I had spent a lifetime swallowing my pride, forcing smiles at family gatherings, and pretending his indifference didn't carve a little piece out of me each time. As Dad wrapped up his speech, thanking everyone for their years of friendship and collaboration, a quiet resolve settled over me. I made my decision. I started walking toward the front of the room. My heels clicked against the polished hardwood floor, a stark, rhythmic sound in the relative quiet that followed the applause. Conversations quieted as people noticed my movement. Heads turned. I could feel the ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. I kept my eyes fixed on my father, who was just stepping down from the dais. My family at the head table watched my approach with varying degrees of alarm. My mother's face was a canvas of confusion and worry. My brothers, Thomas and James, looked annoyed, their expressions clearly asking what I thought I was doing, ruining the perfect moment. But it was my father's face that I focused on. He looked surprised to see me approaching the podium, a faint frown creasing his brow. "Dad," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the sudden silence. I didn't raise it, I didn't need to. The room was already holding its breath. I reached the table and placed the small, wrapped box on the white tablecloth beside him, right next to the commemorative plaque his company had given him. "From your biggest failure," I said, my voice even and calm. The room went dead quiet. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, could sense the confusion and discomfort rippling through the crowd. My father stared at the box, then at me, his mouth slightly open. I didn't wait for a reaction. I turned and walked out. I didn't run. I walked with a deliberate, steady pace, leaving behind 40 years of disappointment and a lifetime of being underestimated. With each step, I felt a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying begin to lift from my shoulders. The heavy cloak of his disapproval, which I had worn for so long, simply fell away. 20 minutes later, I sat in my car in the hotel parking lot, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. Through the large windows of the banquet hall, I could see the party continuing, though the energy seemed different now. People were probably wondering what had just happened, what was in that box, why Harold Bennett's daughter had made such a scene. The truth was, tonight had been building for decades. Growing up in the Bennett household meant understanding your place in the hierarchy. Dad was the undisputed king, the brilliant engineer who designed structures that would outlast us all. Mom was his devoted queen, managing the household and supporting his career with unwavering loyalty. Thomas and James were the princes, groomed from childhood to carry on the family tradition of building things that mattered. And I was the spare. I remembered being 8 years old, bringing Dad a detailed drawing I'd made of a robot that could help sick people. It had articulated joints and a compartment for medicine. I had spent weeks on it. He'd glanced at it for maybe 3 seconds before handing it back. "That's nice, sweetheart," he'd said, his attention already returning to the blueprints on his desk. "Why don't you go help your mother in the kitchen?" Later that day, he spent an hour in the backyard, coaching Thomas on his baseball pitch. When I was 12, I'd won the regional science fair with a project on biomedical engineering. It was a rudimentary model, but the concept was sound. Dad had missed the award ceremony because James had a baseball game. "Sports build character," he'd explained later, ruffling my hair dismissively. "Science projects are just hobbies." The pattern continued through high school. While my brothers were encouraged to take advanced math and engineering courses, I was steered toward more suitable subjects. When I insisted on pursuing pre-med in college, Dad had sighed and said, "Well, nursing is a respectable career for a woman." "I want to be a doctor, Dad," I'd replied, my voice tight with frustration. "Not a nurse." "Let's see how long that lasts," he'd said with a dismissive wave. It lasted. It lasted through medical school, through my residency, through my fellowship in biomedical engineering. It lasted through the countless nights I spent in labs and libraries while my brothers were getting married and having children. It lasted through every family gathering where Dad introduced Thomas as my lawyer's son and James as the one taking over the business, while describing me as still figuring things out. Even when I started my own company 5 years ago, Lilmer Publishing, developing medical devices that were revolutionizing patient care, Dad remained unimpressed. "It's a nice little side business," he'd told relatives, his tone implying it was a quaint hobby to keep me occupied. "Though I worry she's not focused enough on finding a husband." The little side business now employed 200 people and had just closed a $50 million funding round. My latest invention, a non-invasive monitoring device for cardiac patients, was being used in hospitals across the country. 3 universities had offered me research positions. Forbes had called me the most innovative biomedical engineer under 40. But tonight, at his retirement party, I was still just the daughter who'd never had what it takes. My phone rang, pulling me from my reverie. The name Thomas flashed on the screen. I almost ignored it, but a morbid curiosity made me answer. "Naomi? What the hell was that?" His voice was sharp with embarrassment and confusion. "Dad's sitting here with tears in his eyes, and everyone's asking questions. What did you put in that box?" "The truth," I said simply. "What does that mean?" "Mom's freaking out, James is trying to calm everyone down, and Dad won't tell anyone what's inside. You need to come back and explain yourself." I almost laughed. Even now, even after what I'd just done, Thomas was more concerned about appearances than understanding. "I don't need to do anything, Thomas. I've spent 39 years trying to explain myself to this family." "You're being dramatic. Dad loves you. We all do. He just..." "Just what?" I snapped, the calm I'd felt beginning to fray. "Just thinks I'm a failure? Just never bothered to learn what I actually do for a living? Just introduced his retirement party guests to his 2 successful sons and his disappointing daughter?" Silence stretched between us. In the background, I could hear the murmur of the party continuing, though it sounded more subdued now. "He didn't mean it like that," Thomas finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, he did," I said, my voice flat. "And you know what? It's fine. I stopped needing his approval a long time ago." "Then why the dramatic exit? Why embarrass him at his own party?" That was the question I'd been asking myself. Why tonight? Why now? After all these years of swallowing my pride and forcing smiles at family gatherings? Maybe it was because I'd finally realized something. "I wasn't angry at Dad for not understanding my success," I said, the realization crystallizing as I spoke the words aloud. "I was angry at myself for still caring whether he did." "I have to go," I told Thomas. "Naomi, wait." I hung up and started the car. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I caught a glimpse through the banquet hall windows of Dad still sitting at the head table, the open box in front of him. Even from a distance, I could see the paper scattered across the white tablecloth. I could see him holding one of the frames. Part of me wanted to know what he was thinking. Part of me wanted to go back inside and watch him read every word, see his face as he finally understood who I'd become. But a bigger part of me realized it didn't matter anymore. I'd spent decades seeking validation from a man who saw my greatest achievements as hobbies. I'd built a company that was changing lives, created technology that was saving patients across the country, earned respect from colleagues and competitors alike. I'd done all of that while waiting for my father to notice. Tonight, driving away from his retirement party, I finally stopped waiting. The box contained 3 items, each one carefully chosen to tell a story Dad had never bothered to learn. The first was the framed Forbes article, with my picture and the headline about being the most innovative biomedical engineer under 40. The second was the official certificate for the Harold Bennett Science Scholarship, the full-ride scholarship to Oregon State University for students pursuing biomedical engineering that I'd endowed with $500,000 of my own money. The third was a simple, framed photo of me at 8 years old, proudly holding my winning ribbon from the regional science fair, the one he'd missed. I hadn't known what I expected him to feel. Maybe I wanted him to feel the sting of regret, the crushing weight of all the moments he'd missed, all the praise he'd withheld. Maybe, in some small, vengeful corner of my heart, I wanted him to hurt the way he had made me hurt for so many years. 3 days after the retirement party, Mom called. I was in my office at Lumarin, reviewing prototypes for our latest cardiac monitoring system when her name appeared on my phone screen. "Naomi, honey, we need to talk." Her voice sounded tired, strained in a way I'd never heard before. "Hi, Mom. How's Dad?" "That's what I'm calling about. He's not himself since the party. He keeps reading those papers you gave him, over and over. He won't eat, barely sleeps. Yesterday, I found him in his office at 3 in the morning, just staring at that Forbes article." I set down my coffee, suddenly feeling the weight of what I'd done. I didn't mean to upset him, He's proud of you, sweetheart. He always has been. He just doesn't know how to show it. The familiar defense. The same words Mom had used for decades to explain away Dad's indifference. "Mom, he called me a failure. In front of 200 people. He didn't mean it that way. You know how your father is with words. He's not good at expressing emotions." I stared out my office window at the bustling research lab below, where my team was developing technology that would help doctors save lives. He expressed himself pretty clearly about Thomas and James. That's different. He understands their work. Construction, law. These are things he can relate to. Your field is so complex. He's intimidated by it. Intimidated? The word caught me off guard. "Naomi, your father dropped out of college twice before finally getting his engineering degree. He spent his whole career building bridges and buildings, things you can see and touch. What you do, it's like magic to him. He reads your articles and doesn't understand half the words." I'd never known about Dad dropping out of college. In our family mythology, he was the brilliant engineer who'd always known his path. "He could have asked me to explain," I said quietly. "You know he couldn't. Harold Bennett doesn't ask for explanations. It would mean admitting he doesn't know something." Mom paused, and I could hear Dad's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. "Naomi, there's something else. Something I need to tell you about that scholarship you set up." My chest tightened. The Harold Bennett Science Scholarship was the most personal thing in that box. It was a full-ride scholarship to Oregon State University for students pursuing biomedical engineering. I'd endowed it with $500,000, enough to support students for decades. "What about it?" "Your father, he called the university yesterday. He wanted to make sure it was real, that you'd actually done what the certificate said." "And?" "They told him you're the largest individual donor they've ever had under 50. Not just for the scholarship. Apparently, you've been funding their biomedical research lab for 3 years. Anonymous donations, until now." I closed my eyes. Those donations had been my way of giving back, of supporting the next generation of researchers. I'd kept them anonymous because I hadn't wanted recognition, I'd just wanted to help. "He knows about all of it now," Mom continued. "The lab has your name on it, Naomi. The Harold Bennett Biomedical Research Lab. They've been trying to thank you for years." The irony wasn't lost on me. Dad's name was on cutting-edge research he'd never understand, funded by the daughter he'd dismissed. "He's asking to see you," Mom said softly. "Will you come over, please?" I looked at my calendar, packed with meetings and deadlines. My company was in the middle of negotiations with 3 major hospital systems. I had a prototype deadline next week that could revolutionize emergency cardiac care. But something in Mom's voice made me pause. "I'll be there in an hour," I said. As I drove across Portland to my childhood home, I wondered what I was walking into. Was this Dad finally ready to acknowledge what I'd built? Or was it another attempt to minimize my accomplishments, to find a way to make them about him? Either way, I was done pretending his opinion mattered. The girl who desperately wanted her father's approval was gone. In her place was a woman who'd learned to validate herself. Dad was sitting in his study when I arrived, surrounded by the papers from the box. The Forbes article was spread across his desk, along with printouts that looked like they'd come from my company's website. He looked up when I walked in, and I was startled by how much older he seemed than he had 3 days ago. "Naomi." His voice was hoarse, uncertain. "Thank you for coming." I sat in the chair across from his desk, the same chair where I'd received countless lectures about practical career choices and realistic expectations. Today, it felt different. Today, I wasn't the little girl seeking approval. "Mom said you wanted to talk." He gestured at the papers scattered around him. "I've been doing some reading. About your company. About what you've accomplished." "Just now? After 5 years?" The question hung between us, sharp and unavoidable. Dad's face flushed slightly. I thought I knew. I thought it was a small medical supply business or something." I didn't realize. He picked up the Forbes article, shaking his head. "Naomi, you built something extraordinary." "Yes, I have." My directness seemed to surprise him. He was used to me deflecting compliments, minimizing my achievements to make others comfortable. "This device you invented, the cardiac monitor, the article says it saved thousands of lives." "Tens of thousands, actually. The latest models are being used in emergency rooms across the country. We're expanding to Europe next year." Dad stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. "How did you do it? How did you build all this?" The question was so genuine, so devoid of his usual dismissiveness, that it caught me off guard. For a moment, I saw not the father who disappointed me, but an old man, genuinely trying to understand his daughter's life. Hard work. A lot of very smart people who believed in the vision. And about 15 years of your constant skepticism motivating me to prove you wrong. He winced at that last part. "Naomi, let me finish." My voice was calm but firm. "I started this company because I saw problems in healthcare that needed solving. Patients were dying because existing monitoring equipment was too expensive, too complex, or too unreliable. I knew I could build something better." I gestured to the Forbes article on his desk. "That device has a 98% accuracy rate and costs 1/3 of what similar equipment used to cost." It's not about the money or the recognition. It's about the emergency room doctor in rural Montana who can now diagnose heart attacks in patients who would have died 20 years ago. Dad's eyes were filling with tears. "I had no idea. I never bothered to learn." "No, you didn't. You dismissed it as a hobby, just like you dismissed everything else I ever cared about." I was wrong. The words came out barely above a whisper. I was so wrong, and I don't know how to fix it. I studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd grown so used to, but all I saw was genuine remorse and something that looked like awe. "Dad, do you know what I wanted most when I was growing up?" He shook his head. "I wanted you to ask me about my day, just once. I wanted you to show up to one of my science fairs, to read one of my school papers, to act like what I was doing mattered to you." It did matter. You mattered. I didn't know how to connect with you. Your brothers were so much like me, and you were so," he searched for the word, "different." "Brilliant," he finally landed on. "You were brilliant in ways I couldn't understand. It intimidated me. The admission hung in the air between us, raw and honest in a way our family had never been. "There's something else," Dad said, reaching for a manila folder I hadn't noticed before. "I've been making some calls since the party. Learning about things I should have known years ago." He opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers, press releases, medical journal articles, university announcements, all featuring my name and work. "Did you know you've been nominated for the National Medal of Technology and Innovation?" He held up an official-looking document. "The White House, Naomi. The President wants to recognize your contributions to American innovation." I had known, actually. The notification had come last month, and I'd been too busy with product launches to think much about it. Awards and recognition had stopped feeling important after years of working for personal satisfaction rather than external validation. "And this," he pulled out another paper. "You've been invited to present at the World Health Organization's Conference on Medical Device Innovation. They're calling your work paradigm shifting." Dad set the papers down and looked at me with something approaching wonder. How did I miss all of this? How did I have a daughter changing the world and not even notice? "Because you never looked," I said simply. "You decided who I was when I was 8 years old and never bothered to update your assessment." "I know. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life." He paused, seeming to gather courage for something. "Naomi, would you explain it to me? Your work. I want to understand." For 39 years, I dreamed of this moment. Dad finally asking about my passion, wanting to understand what drove me. Now that it was happening, I felt surprisingly detached from it. It's complex. Medical device engineering requires an understanding of physiology, electronics, material science, data analysis. "I'm not as smart as you," he interrupted, "but I'm not stupid. Try me." I studied his face, seeing genuine curiosity there. Slowly, I began to explain how cardiac monitors work, how I'd identified the flaws in existing technology, how my team had developed solutions that were more accurate and more affordable. Dad listened intently, asking surprisingly thoughtful questions. "So the sensors you developed can detect irregularities that older machines miss?" he asked. "Exactly. And because our device uses machine learning algorithms, it gets better at diagnosis over time. It learns from every patient it monitors." He shook his head in amazement. "That's incredible, Naomi. You're saving lives every day." The conversation continued for another hour. Dad asked about my team, my manufacturing process, my plans for expansion. For the first time in my life, he seemed genuinely interested in understanding my world. But something had shifted in me during those 3 days since the party. His attention felt too little, too late. "I should go," I said finally. "I have a board meeting this afternoon." "Wait." Dad stood as I did. "Naomi, I know I can't undo 40 years of not seeing you, but I want to try to do better. I want to be the father you deserved." I looked at him, this man who'd shaped so much of my early life through his indifference, and felt something close to pity. Not for his ignorance, but for everything he'd missed by choosing not to see me. "I appreciate that, Dad. But I'm not the little girl who needed your approval anymore. I built a life I'm proud of, with or without your understanding." "I know you have. That's what makes this so tragic. I missed watching my daughter become extraordinary." I walked toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I hope you enjoy your retirement. You earned it." As I drove back to the office, I realized something had been resolved, though not in the way I'd expected. I'd finally gotten my father's attention, his respect, even his admiration. And I discovered it no longer mattered to me. 2 weeks later, I was in my office when Thomas called. I almost didn't answer. My relationship with my brothers had grown even more strained since the retirement party, but curiosity got the better of me. Naomi, we have a problem, he said without preamble. Dad's been calling everyone we know, telling them about your company, about your achievements. He's like a broken record. That's a problem? He showed up at my law firm yesterday with printed copies of that Forbes article. He cornered 3 of my partners in the break room and spent an hour explaining your cardiac monitoring device. He doesn't even understand what you do, but he's trying to tell everyone about it. I almost smiled. Dad, who'd never shown interest in my work, was now apparently its biggest advocate. He did the same thing at James's office, Thomas continued, and at his golf club, and at Mom's book club. He's driving everyone crazy, Naomi. He's become obsessed. With what? With you. With making sure everyone knows how successful his daughter is. It's like he's trying to make up for 40 years of not bragging about you by doing it all at once. I leaned back in my chair, processing this. Dad, who'd introduced me as still figuring things out for most of my adult life, was now apparently my unofficial publicist. There's more, Thomas said. He wants to throw you a party. A celebration of your achievements. He's already called the country club, started making a guest list. He wants to invite everyone from the retirement party and formally. I don't know, apologize? Introduce you properly? The irony was thick. After a lifetime of being overlooked, Dad wanted to put me center stage. But now that he was finally ready to see me, I'd moved beyond needing to be seen by him. Tell him no, I said. What? Tell him I don't want a party. I don't need him to introduce me to people. I don't need his validation or his public apologies. Naomi, he's trying. He's really trying to make things right. I know he is. But that's for him, not for me. I'm not interested in being his redemption story. The next morning, Dad showed up at my office. My assistant tried to stop him, but he'd apparently charmed his way past building security and made it all the way to my floor. We need to talk, he said, standing in my doorway with the same determined expression I'd seen him wear when tackling difficult engineering problems. Dad, I'm in the middle of. I know you don't want the party. Thomas told me. But I need you to understand something. He stepped into my office and closed the door behind him. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for you. I don't need you to do anything for me. Yes, you do. His voice was firmer than I'd heard it in weeks. Because I spent 40 years telling people you were just okay, just average, just my daughter who hadn't figured things out yet. And now I know the truth. But they don't. He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. Do you know what this is? I shook my head. It's a list of every person I told that you were wasting your time with science projects. Every colleague I complained to about your impractical career choices. Every family friend I told not to take your work seriously. His voice cracked slightly. It's a long list, Naomi. And I owe it to you to set the record straight with every single person on it. I stared at the paper, understanding finally dawning. This wasn't about his guilt or his need for redemption. This was about repairing the damage he'd done to my reputation, to how people saw me. I spent decades undermining you without even realizing it, he continued. Let me spend whatever time I have left building you up. For the first time since the retirement party, I felt my emotional armor crack slightly. Not because I needed his help, but because I finally understood the depth of what he was trying to repair. Okay, I said quietly. But we do this my way. Dad's face lit up with relief and gratitude. However you want it. Looking at him in that moment, I realized that my revenge had been more complete than I'd intended. I'd wanted him to see me, and now he couldn't see anything else. I'd wanted him to understand what he'd missed, and now he was drowning in regret. I'd wanted him to acknowledge my success, and now he was desperate to proclaim it to anyone who would listen. But somehow, his recognition felt less important than the journey I'd taken to earn it. The best revenge, I realized, had been building a life so successful that his opinion of it had become irrelevant. Everything else was just epilogue. As I worked alongside my father to plan an event that would properly introduce me to his world, I couldn't help but reflect on the strange turn my revenge had taken. From a moment of anger to an opportunity for healing, even if the healing was more for him than for me.